G'day legends. In this video we're going to take a look at mixing acoustic guitar. Now we've done some acoustic guitar mixing on this channel before, but it's been kind of like the standard kind of acoustic guitar stuff, you know, where you want to blend it in with the mix and you don't want it to take up too much space. You need to carve a bit of space out of the guitar to make room for things like vocals, lead guitars, and just other instruments, because acoustic guitars are pretty complex and they have a lot of frequencies in them and they can just take up a bunch of space in a mix. But what if you have an acoustic guitar that needs to stand out in a mix? So you've got a big rock band style mix, something kind of dense, but you want to hear the acoustic guitar. It's actually adding something important to the mix that needs to stand out. So we're going to take a look at how we might approach mixing an acoustic guitar in that setting, as opposed to the opposite, where you carve a bunch of space out of it. We want to make the acoustic guitar stand out. So check this out. This is the track that I have been mixing this week, and it's got this really cool acoustic guitar part in it that needs to be bold and stand out in the mix. So have a listen to this. So pretty cool, bit of that southern vibe going on here. Now have a listen to what the guitar sounded like raw versus processed. Pretty big difference there. Like, our mixed guitar's a little bit brighter, but it's a little bit more mid-range and forward, whereas the raw one is a little bit warmer, cozier sounding, bit darker and drier sounding as well. There's no reverb or anything like that on it. Now have a listen to them in the context of the mix and see how the mixed one just kind of cuts through the mix and just adds more excitement to the guitar and makes the guitar more of a feature and less of just a layer that's sort of just tucked in there. Alright, so you hear the difference. The mixed one cuts through a little bit better. The raw one is maybe a little bit on the muddy side in the mix as well, but you know, different kicks for different folks. I know some people will probably say they like the raw one better, and look, the raw one does have a cool characteristic about it as well, but I want this guitar to have a little bit of jangliness and I want it to poke out of the mix and not just be kind of dark and sitting in there. So obviously mixing subjective, we've got to keep that in mind, and there's no one way to mix an acoustic guitar. And depending how the guitar's been recorded is going to affect how you're going to process it. So the processing I'm about to show you isn't necessarily a blueprint for mixing an acoustic guitar just like this. It really does depend what the source material sounds like, but it should give you a bit of an idea of what to look for and the sound that you should be trying to achieve. Okay, so let's get into this processing. So we've got 4 plugins in total. Virtual Mix Rack, which is from Slate Digital, and then we've got Pro Q4, which is just a digital EQ from FabFilter. We also have Pro MB, which is a multiband compressor from FabFilter, and then we have a second instance of Virtual Mix Rack to finish it off. And we also have a send going to a reverb. So we're going to have a look at that first. So have a look here. We've got bus 10, which is my acoustic guitar reverb. And I'm sending this in quite heavily. You can see I've got it all the way up to 2. So, you know, at unity 0, which is going in 100%. And then I'm pushing it up even further to 2. So over on bus 10, we have the LX480 Essentials, just quick and easy, nice reverb to use. And I'm basically using the guitar plate preset. And that just is a great starting point if you're going to add just a nice reverb to an acoustic guitar. Have a listen to what that sounds like. So it's quite a wet sound, and that is exactly what I'm chasing here. I want to hear that roomy sound of the acoustic guitar, a little bit swampy, if you will. I feel like that's kind of like the vibe and the style of this kind of thing that's going on here. So on bus 10, where our reverb is, we also have an EQ following up after it. And I just have a low shelf cutting from 238 Hertz and cutting about -5 dB. So rolling off some low end where things can get a little bit muddy. And then we're also doing a cut at 3.2K, which is where things can get a little bit harsh sounding and pokey. And then we also have a high shelf cut at 12K at around -5 dBs. So have a listen to what this does as we bypass it off and on. You'll notice that the reverb kind of gets a little bit more mid-range focused, and it just cleans it up a little bit. So you can hear all of those frequency points that I've picked there are just cleaning things up and making the reverb a little bit smaller and a little bit smoother sounding. Taking away like that hissy top end, taking away a lot of the rumble that we get a lot of low end from the acoustic guitar, and there's a lot of body there. And what this can do is add a lot of boominess to the sound, which is not what we want. We just want that kind of reflective, spacious sound. So we're going to get a lot of that from the mid-range. So I pretty much set that up first because I feel like that's a really important part of the sound, and I want to hear the reverb while I'm processing. So just keep that in mind. If you want to have reverb on a sound, sometimes it's best to get that sound in there early and then start processing and hear what it sounds like with the reverb, because if it's part of the sound, it's definitely important to hear it while you're processing. Okay, so our first instance of virtual mix rack, I literally have just loaded the acoustic guitar preset. This feels like a bit of a hack, but it can be a really good starting point for acoustic guitars. I feel like they've got some pretty basic sort of settings here, which just work well across the board. But I have tweaked these settings a little bit. So I have pulled the high shelf down to 2.5 dBs. I think it was a little bit higher. And then I've added a small cut to the low mids, about 3 dBs at around 482 Hertz. There is also a high pass filter up to 70 Hertz, pretty standard with acoustic guitar. Anywhere between like 60 to 70 Hertz is a pretty normal kind of high pass filter you might expect to see. And let's just have a listen to what this EQ is adding. Just making it a little bit sparklier and just tightening it up a little bit, cleaning up those low mids slightly. Now we've got the FG stress. So we're using this in parallel. You can see the mix numbers at 50%. I find that this works good with acoustic guitars to just do parallel compression. I generally do not really enjoy the sound of compression on acoustic guitars. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's just because there's just so much information in an acoustic guitar that when you compress it, it just doesn't sound that good to me. So either gentle compression or parallel compression sounds best to me. And that's what's cool about this preset is it starts up with parallel compression. So you can see we've got a high pass filter, which is going to ignore a little bit of the low end in the acoustic guitar as well, which is important with compressing the guitar because the compressor grabs the low end, and that's what makes it sound really pumpy and not very nice. So making the compressor ignore a bit of that low end is going to help it compress a little bit nicer. It's a medium attack, medium release, so it's not going to be pumping and aggressive. It's just going to be kind of a smooth sounding compression. So let's have a listen to what this is doing. Hear how the guitar sounds a little bit more balanced now, and that kind of low mid kind of wooliness, a little bit of mud is disappearing now. It's starting to just sound a little bit crisper, a little bit punchier, which is what we want. It's also worth mentioning the ratios at 3:1. So generally with acoustic guitar, I'd go anywhere between 2:1 to 4:1. I generally don't like really high ratios on acoustic guitar, but whatever sounds best, whatever gets the job done. Next up, we've got Revival. This is just going to add a little bit of excitement, shimmer, sparkle, whatever to the top end. So have a listen to what this is doing. So a little bit of that really goes a long way. You don't really want to overdo that. But that's a really good starting point. So again, it's a preset within virtual mix racks, but you can pretty much just copy this sort of idea as a general starting point for acoustic guitar. I think this works quite well. Now next up is just FabFilter's Pro Q4. You could do this with any EQ. It doesn't have to be FabFilter. It can be a stock standard EQ. It really doesn't matter. This is just a bit of a cut to clean up the low mids even further. So in the context of the mix, I still think I felt like the acoustic guitar was a little bit on the boomy, woolly kind of side. So generally around 200 to 250 Hertz is an area in acoustic guitars that can really fill up your mix and make it sound muddy. So have a listen to what this sounds like. We'll put the mix in there with it so you can hear what this is doing. So you can hear as I boost that, the mix just like goes muddy as. It's disgusting. And when I cut it really hard, the mix opens up. So the acoustic guitar really does take up a lot of space in the mix, and this area here can be really problematic. And when you listen to the guitar on its own, maybe you go, it sounds a little bit thin now. It's not as like nice and warm, but don't worry about that. Worry about how it sounds in the mix. If this is making the mix sound better, then this is okay. A lot of the time, especially with proximity and where we put mics on guitars, this is an area that can kind of build up. So I really like what that's doing. That's a 4 dB cut at around 250 Hertz. I think that sounds really nice. Just opens the mix up nicely. So that EQ move was definitely done within the context of the mix. You know, I might have sat here in solo and tweaked the guitar like we did just then, and then had to listen to it with everything around it and thought this still isn't sitting right. And then I made that cut in Pro Q4 and felt like everything started to glue together a bit nicer. So it is important to do things in the context of the mix. All right, next up, this is an optional kind of thing. I've got this on here because at times the acoustic guitar gets a little bit aggressive in the way it's played. It does get really spanky on the plectrum on the strings, and sometimes that jumps out in a way that I don't like, but the rest of the time I like the way the guitar sounds. So rather than just like, you know, doing a static cut with an EQ to like pull out some of that harshness that jumps out, then the guitar becomes dull again and you're kind of going backwards and forwards. This is some multiband compression with a high shelf in Pro MB. You could probably do this with a dynamic EQ as well. Maybe any kind of multiband compressor that's fast enough to grab the transients. So what I've got here is that high shelf setup, and then I've got the fastest attack, fastest release, and then I've got the range set to -6. You just have to play with the range to see what works for you. So a cool thing that you can do in Pro MB is you can click on this little expert tab, and then you've got the option to go between band and free. When you've got it on band, any kind of frequencies that are working in this area are going to cause the compression based on where you set your threshold. When you put it on free, you get this little band and you can select which frequencies are going to make the guitar react. So I didn't really necessarily want to grab the airy stuff, more of the stuff that's between like 2.5K to 11K. There's sort of just like anywhere in between here at any time. The guitar can get these aggressive spikes in transients when the picks hit really hard. And I want this to grab those and then push that frequency range down. So check this out and see if you see it working at all. So you can see on some of those hard accents that would normally maybe jump out of the mix and sound a little bit annoying, this is just reining them in. So let's bypass it off and on. So it's definitely helping make that top end sound a little bit smoother. And obviously you can go harder with this. You can bring the range right down and you can really smash it. You can see what that sounds like. And that doesn't sound too bad either. We still get the brightness of the guitar, but all of the transients kind of get tucked in and it doesn't jump out and get too harsh sounding. So that's what this plugin is here for. Now, if the guitar is played a little bit smoother, you might not need this. This is just here to deal with aggressiveness. So far we've just kind of checked a bunch of boxes. You know, we've given the guitar a bit of EQ, we've given it some compression. We have also given it some reverb. We've put it in a bit of a sense of space, dealt with some of the harshness, those transients that are poked through. But now what we need to do is give the guitar a little bit of character. So we're going to finish off this processing with our second round of virtual mix rack. And we've got the FGN. Now this is a pretty aggressive EQ. That's how I kind of think of it. I feel like any small moves you make with this really make a big difference. So let's have a look at what this EQ is doing. So here how it's making the guitar jump forward. It's coming out of the mix more now, but it's not necessarily like brighter. It's not that jangly, airy top end sound. It's the mid-range. So we're boosting at around 637 Hertz here, 600, 700 Hertz. So generally this can be a range that might be considered muddy or like almost boxy, but with this particular guitar recording and the sound that I'm going for, I really want to hear the notes of the riff, and that is around this area. You know what I mean? If you cut that away, the guitar starts to sound hollow. You can't really hear the riff that well. Have a listen to that in the context of the mix. So it's kind of finding that sweet spot where you can hear the melody and the notes, but it doesn't start to get too muddy in the mix. And that's an area I would generally kind of cut with acoustic guitars as well. That sounded okay in the mix with it cut, you know? But that's what I do if I wanted the acoustic to kind of disappear into the mix and not really stand out as much, because I want it to stand out. That's why we're boosting this area. And we're also boosting at 2.7K. So have a listen to what this is doing. So it's just giving it a little bit of attitude, helping it to not get too muddy as well, because we're boosting that low mids, we're just getting a bit of high mids, kind of balancing it out a bit. That's just giving it some nice edge in the mix. So you can hear, without it, it sounds a little bit smoother, but with this, it gives it a bit of character and a bit of attitude. And then the last thing we're going to do is add a touch of saturation. I don't mind if this guitar has a bit of dirt to it. You can hear the song. It kind of goes hand in hand with it. Doesn't matter if that acoustic guitar has a bit of grit. So we're using the Hollywood saturator from VMR. There's a couple of instances in here, but this one sounded pretty cool for the job, and any kind of saturation plugin should do the job really. So it doesn't sound distorted and gritty or anything like that. We've got the saturation at 6 and the mix is 100% in preamp and in push mode. You know, pushing these different buttons achieves different sounds. I'm not even going to bother going between them, but you can hear it's adding some warmth and some color to it, which is cool. So you can see we've just given it like this really big kind of like mid-range bump up, and then also smoothed out the highs and the lows. There is also a high pass filter on here at 52 Hertz. It might not really be doing that much, but it's there. But overall, all of this is just adding this cool mid-range to the guitar. In the context of the mix, So the idea is that it's an acoustic guitar that's got some attitude and it stands out. And so playing with that mid-range is the key here. It's not really cutting mid-range so much and like tucking it and making that smiley face. It's about finding the parts of the mids that you can bring forward that are going to bring character and attitude to the mix. So I hope you found this helpful. It was probably a little long-winded. I'm sorry. I just wanted to explain a lot of the steps along the way. I know some people like get to the point like who cares, but I feel like explaining things and going over this stuff is more important than rushing through and saying, hey, add this, 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 and this is how you get the sound. There's got to be a reason why you do things. And if the guitar was recorded a different way, I would probably EQ it slightly different because I'd be chasing the sound, but I'd have to choose a different path to get there. You know, the EQ points are going to be a little bit different. Maybe the amount of compression I use is going to be a little bit different. It's just important to approach each recording and each sound that you're working on with the mindset of trying to achieve the sound that you're looking for rather than just following a recipe. So with that said, hopefully this video helps you kind of understand the approach that I would take to giving an acoustic guitar a bit of attitude in a mix. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support this channel, make sure you check out the link in the description below to my website. Go and check out my range of drum sample packs and mixing courses. Grabbing that stuff is a massive support for the time that goes into making videos just like this. Now, if you want to check out the opposite technique where you want to sync an acoustic guitar into a mix and just like get it sitting in there nice and pretty, then check out this next video coming up.